Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head, and in this episode, I'm talking to Devon Lowndes. She is the founder and neurodiversity consultant at Self Agency. Self Agency is a neurodiversity training and consulting specialist, which specialise in organisational learning and development. They do neurodiversity and equality, diversity, inclusion policy, and also available for conferences and talks. She's previously been a neurodiversity champion for Bristol City Council. As always, I'll put links to Self Agency and other things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Devon.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Where I wanted to kind of start the conversation off with was I was scanning through your LinkedIn post last night and realised that you'd moved to Bristol 4 years ago and were talking quite greatly about how much it accepted you. Really kind of piqued my interest as a neurodiverse brain that liked a location and why that location kind of worked for you. So why Bristol for a start? How did you find out you really found it suited you?
Yeah, so I think something that's been a big theme for me, and I've certainly found it that this word resonates with all of the other neurodivergent people that I've come across, is belonging. Mm-hmm. I think when you've chosen maybe to take on a label of divergent, or you have found it difficult to assimilate to like typical standards or expectations, sometimes belonging is really hard. I certainly felt like I hadn't belonged in my school setting, maybe with certain special individuals, but not in the group. I never felt like I belonged in the group. And that followed me to university, that followed me into my workplaces. And in Bristol, there is a real sense of independence and individuality that's really celebrated here. And I knew I knew that I could stand up in any room in Bristol and spout my opinions and views. And at best, the room agrees. And at worst, they disagree, but I was accepted anyway, because there is that celebration of individuality here. Difference in the Bristol culture seems to be somewhat accepted and celebrated and expected. So I think that there's a lot of things that play into that. I think there's a really entrepreneurial spirit in Bristol, not just based in business, but also in community and events. But I also think there's quite a mix of culture here that's been established for like hundreds of years now, way before I arrived. Well, just before I arrived.
Oh, I see.
So I think that idea of having individuality here is something that was celebrated. So I found belonging in Bristol for maybe the first time. And I had a sense that this would be a city of friends, a safe place, somewhere that I could belong. Before I'd even moved here, when I'd just been to visit. So I think that attracts industry, that attracts culture, and that attracts people that are neurodivergent, perhaps. And those people are allowed to not just survive here, but thrive here. So I think that I found belonging here. I found home here. And I don't think anybody can really have thriving until you belong.
Yeah.
If you're not accepted for who you are, you don't feel accepted for who you are, and valued for who you are and what makes you unique and individual, then how on earth are you ever meant to bring anything to the table? You know, you're always spending your time and your energy trying to fit in or assimilate or people please or masking. But when you feel like you belong, you can drop that, right? And you can get on board with and get on with the business of being yourself, which is amazing. And it's not a given. It's not a given to be able to be yourself.
No, it's not. And I think sort of quite a few guests mentioned that. It's something interesting conversation is it that you could waste. I like to think of mental energy as this. It's not an infinite thing. It's a finite kind of resource. I guess a bit like fuel in your own petrol tank of your car, or a battery if you've got one of them type of cars. And if you're wasting resource on having to mask, be something else, play the role that you think you might need to be to fit in, then you can't thrive in other things because you're already taking 20% of your capacity up doing something else.
Absolutely. And as human beings, we're social creatures. We are always going to seek to be a part of the group. We're always going to want to belong, to add value to our communities, be them at work and in education or, our families. So our mental energy is always going to be expended on that as a priority. It's almost inherent in us all to do that first, before we can start kind of putting the energy towards building something or adding value. We're first going to try and find our little niche, find our way to fit in, and quite often that means like leaving massive parts of us at the door in order to do that.
Yes, the interesting thing with social creatures. And you said you pretty much felt it straight away. Was it just you turned up in the city after a visit for whatever reason? It was like, something here feels more relaxing and this feels like home. Is it that kind of epiphany moment, or had you spent a few more months before that really come around?
No, it was fairly instantaneous. There's something about the level of I think there's something about the creativity here, and it's not necessarily just the creative industries or the kind of artistic stuff that might spring to mind when we think of creativity, when we think of Bristol, but the innovation that is so steeped in Bristol's history. I mean, things like the suspension bridge and from engineering through to aerospace, it's kind of woven in here. And there's this acceptance of different cultures. Now, I've had someone before say that this might be because of our proximity to Glastonbury, that we've picked up some of those kind of spiritual liberal feelings that kind of celebrate different, right? Rather than kind of penalizing different. But there's a sense, and I think that lots of neurodivergent people, lots of people that have maybe been through trauma, difficulty, spells of bad mental health, we can sense when we're in the presence of friends, people that understand, people that have also been through that. And sometimes, maybe when we're experiencing bad mental health for the first time, it's not until we come face to face with a person who's been through that and recognizes it in us that we can start to accept and understand what's going on. It's an intangible quality that's almost in the air when we come together with people that understand us, that can relate, can empathize on an advanced empathy level, not just the idea and the practice of putting someone in someone else's shoes, or being able to imagine ourselves going through something that we haven't been through, but coming through people that have been through an adversity that has made them not belong. You can feel that. When someone has experienced that, and that maybe going through that hardship is the only way to understand how important belonging is, how important it is to connect over the difficult parts of our shared experience as well as the positive parts. And maybe in England in particular, we might be quite guilty of sort of, I'm thinking of that maybe quite 70s culture of shying away from people that are going through hardship like it's catching.
Yes, yeah.
When actually, when you come face to face with someone else that's going to understand your hardship, I feel like we know that before we know that. It's intuitive.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. It's the kind of the mirror neurons, isn't it? Yeah, really interesting with that, and how you can just sort of smell. I don't know, smell things might sound the wrong word way of putting it, but I'm sure writing in a more eloquent way of me putting the next statement. But you can almost smell things on people sometimes, can't you? Like, if particularly with stuff like that.
Absolutely. I think there's this thing about our nervous system assimilation, right? I think that our nervous system is where we carry the scars of our mental health. If our skin, our bodies, our CT scans show our scars of our physical health and kind of what our body's been through in that way, our nervous systems know what we've been through, what puts us in fight or flight, what calms us down, what seems safe, what seems dangerous, what's exciting, what's all of those things, and they are. We almost don't have the language for a lot of it yet, so we aren't communicating about it consciously, and our nervous systems are just recognizing it when there is another nervous system in the room that's aligned in some way or has similar experiences. We can kind of see that in the way that one gym goer might be able to physically see another gym goer with their eyes. I think our nervous system can look at another nervous system and say, hey, this person's been working out emotionally. Yeah. I can tell. And they're going to understand. And it's stuff we really don't have the language for yet. Hence all of the toing and froing and difficult conversations around the language around neurodiversity, right? The language of neurodivergent, neurotypical. I mean, this is something I've always really struggled with. I mean, who wants to be neurotypical? Who is neurotypical? I don't think anyone's neurotypical. I think we might have a typical, bunny ears, set of expectations, what typically expect from different people in different communities and different settings. But every single brain, every single nervous system is different and has grown in a different environment. There's no typical and atypical rose, right? We just say that this rose has grown in this kind of environment and been exposed to these kind of gene pools in the past, and this rose hasn't. We can just see that. We just know that, and it's neither is the right rose, neither is the typical rose, and neither is the divergent one. We just accept that both are products of their nature and their nurture, and we're still finding language for that, really, around neurodiversity.
We are.
Yeah.
We are. And I think it's really interesting. It was sort of goes around in my mind as you were sort of citing with neurotypical, that it's sort of a term we use, I guess, to just kind of describe maybe the average. I don't know. But I also don't want to turn it into this alienating term. If you're talking to somebody who's neurotypical, well, you're neurotypical. And you don't want to alienate people either. So it's kind of like you want all these difficult conversations about what neurodiversity means and how that, and also as somebody who's neurodiverse, what it's like to be on the other side and how do we all work together as a community. But you also have to have these conversations about language, but without them getting in the way of the main conversation about what it's like. It is a really hard thing to navigate, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's really hard to talk about neurodiversity without talking about labels. It comes up a lot, right? Mm-hmm. What labels do we take? What identity do we take? What labels are we given? What labels do we take on for ourselves? And, my overriding feeling with this really is that someone who has chosen to take on an identifying label, someone who is resonating with a certain set of language to describe themselves, is using that as a tool to communicate to others what they need, what they're like, how to explain themselves. And as this is an area that can be so misunderstood and so stigmatized, we're still finding our feet with that. And we're still trying to find our way. And, there's no one that is a typical person that's been through no hardship and hasn't experienced on some level some of the human condition. We all go through to varying degrees and in so many different ways, but so many similar things. And, I like to say no one sits in a 2-year waiting list to go and be assessed by a medical professional, to take on a diagnosis, to tell their boss at work because they want to be special.
No.
Which I think can sometimes be what people are thinking. People are doing that because they are struggling. They are going through challenges and daily strife and hardship that they're trying to fix for themselves. It's not about wanting to be different or wanting to take on something that makes them special. I think I'm using the word special because I feel like this is, for me anyway, the word that's kind of been weaponized against me, right? You're not special. You don't need the extra time. Yeah. If you're going to get extra, it's not fair for them to give you more. Why does anyone need a label? We should just treat everybody the same. Everyone should be treated fairly. Everyone should get the extra time. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think a lot of neurodivergent people will be explaining maybe what's hard for them. So we say, and again, because the language is not quite there yet, we'll say something like, I find it difficult to be on time for things. And there'll be other people that respond, yeah, so do I. Why don't you set your alarm earlier? That's what I do. And it's really worked for me. And you're thinking, okay, we are having some shared human experience here, but it is clearly to a different degree. Because where you set an alarm earlier and that's worked for you, I have been driven to depression. I've been made to feel I don't belong, I'm not accepted, I'm not valued. I've taken medications. I've sought out lots of different routes. So it's about the amount that somebody has to go through in order to overcome what's challenging for them.
Yeah. I used to have a similar thing. I can't smell very well. Or I used to be able to smell very well. And I do. If you really remember somebody in my school class, it's like, what you got to do is look, cover, write, check. See, this is what I see. Here's my homework from last night. Great. I could do that 1,000 times and still wouldn't have learned the word. Like, that's a great tool. But for me, it's not the tool that works.
Absolutely. And this is where the term neurodiversity for me is kind of all encompassing. It's not just about identifying those of us whose brains aren't processing the world in line with the typical expectations. Mm-hmm. Neurodiversity is about accepting that because something worked for us, or because something has been so in the books of sewing, I don't know, or even to say where it comes from. Where do these ideas come from? The 80s, Victorian times, I don't know. This idea of like, this is how you learn this specific thing, or this is how you get this workload done. You do it exactly as I've done it, and I'm going to teach you that. That prescriptive way of method, isn't it? It's not necessarily talking about the outcome, which is learning how to spell the word. It's talking about the method of how to learn to spell the word.
Yes.
And until we can accept that what worked for me isn't necessarily what's going to work for you, we are treating brains like they're all the same. And they're just not. They just do all work differently. And then we overcomplicate it because what you're describing there and what gets added on it is trauma and distress. So, there's another layer then when we sit down to do our look, cover, spell, check. Is that the right order? I seem to remember that from school. There's some kind of bell.
Look, cover, look, cover, spell, check, look, cover, right, check. Yeah.
There you go. And so, you can hammer that in, but even those words now, I'm sure, could bring a sweaty palm to a few of us, right?
Yeah.
I think I got my reading and writing up to average. I'm dyslexic. I brought my reading and writing up to the average level by the time I'd left school. Even now, still today, if someone asks me to do a piece of writing emotionally, I go to a dark place. I'm frustrated. I'm not very kind to myself or those around me for that period of time. my whole world, my whole sense of self comes into question. And that's nothing to do with my ability to spell or to write or read today, now. It's to do with the distress and the trauma that I took on while I was learning those processes. Because not only was I learning how to read and write, I was learning that I was bad at it, that it was going to take me longer, that it was hard, that it was upsetting, that it was stressful, that if I didn't do this, then I was going to fail in life, that you have to pass these exams or I wouldn't get a job when I was older. So it's now a learned stress response that I have to writing, that we layer up. And now that's the real challenge. Overcoming that is the real challenge. We have now methods of helping dyslexic people get around the spelling scenario. What's harder to overcome is those micro traumas. We're talking about neurodivergent people receiving up to 1,500 micro traumas at primary school alone. So that's, you're not trying hard. You're lazy. Yes. You're bad. You need to work harder.
Yeah.
Those attacks to people's personhoods, because we are, even if we're children, and I'm such a big believer in this, they are still people, human beings, persons, right? Oh. And if you wouldn't say it to an adult, we should not be saying it to a child. We wouldn't expect our boss to turn around and say, what you are doing is not, not working hard. And well, I think that actually some managers and some bosses do, but this is an attack on someone's personhood. Actually think about what you're telling that person. They're not good enough. They're not worthy. They're not enough.
Yeah.
And that's rubbish. Actually, they are enough. And if they can't spell a word, they're going to get by fine in the world, actually.
Oh, yes. You are. You are 100% correct there. And it is the stuff you internalize that you take on adulthood. Like, one thing I wanted to ask you is, you got diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. What sort of age, just put it in context, what sort of age were you when you worked that out, or found that out? Sorry.
So I had my dyslexia diagnosis relatively early. I was 7. Okay. My mum was dyslexic, and she noticed it in me and pushed for me to go for the assessment. I don't think, school didn't believe her at first. They genuinely thought I was lazy. Yeah. They thought I was lazy and I wasn't trying hard enough. Couldn't spell my own surname when I was 7 years old. So I think that should have been a sign to them that I wasn't just being busy, but there we go, it wasn't. So she took me for a private diagnosis at that point, and that's my privilege right there. This is the reason that I'm a dyslexic person or a person with ADHD that's managing to survive in the world. And now at my age of 29, I think when I started my own business, starting to thrive. But for a long time, I was just surviving because my mum gave me that privilege. And it was, I do have the privilege of being middle class. I do have the privilege of being born into a country where we have a lot of privilege, like that we don't go hungry and that we often have shelter and the things that we need. But I also have the privilege of love and self-esteem. And that was because I had a really understanding parent who told me immediately that it was this cool, amazing thing to have a brain that thought differently. That didn't make me very popular.
No.
The teachers are like, and I think this is it. We talk about this in the corporate world. It's top down, right? Change has to happen at management level in order to see any change in the staff. And it is the same at school. If anybody thinks that bullying starts amongst the children, they are wrong. It starts with the teachers. Children are the most likely to act on their intuition, right? We spend all sorts of time growing up as adults learning to ignore our intuition, but children will pick up very quickly on who is the student that the teacher finds a bit odd, a bit annoying, a bit stressful, who is the one that the teacher thinks is not worthy of their time. Right. And it's born from that. And that's how the teachers felt about me, because instead of getting on with the worksheets that had been put in front of me, I asked a million questions and wanted to talk it through with the teacher like I was an adult or, like a mini adult. And that was frustrating for them. And, I can understand that. They've got 30 kids in a class to look after. They can't just be answering Devon's questions all day long. But instead of nurturing that in me, or instead of explaining to me that, while my questions were great and they'd love to have that conversation, now wasn't the right time. The teachers would display outward frustration, disappointment, annoyance towards me. And it wasn't long after that dyslexia diagnosis that I became really badly bullied by my peers. And that didn't really stop then. I was from quite a small town, so those peers were with me until I finished my A-levels.
Ah, God, yes, yeah. And did you get the ADHD diagnosis at the same time?
No, that was much later in life.
Okay.
So mum had dyslexia, so she understood that and could see that, but ADHD wasn't sort of something that was on her radar. I first went, I think it was kind of in my GCSE period of time that I started displaying really strong signs of bad mental health, having lots of panic attacks, wanting to spend lots of time avoiding certain adults that, treated me badly. When, they were in a position of power and I was a child, I put that responsibility firmly with them. And I went through years of trying to figure out what was wrong with me. That was the question that went round my head. What is wrong with me? Why can't I fix this? And it baffles me now. I went to the GP several times through my university. I dropped out of university, but when I first went, and then after I dropped out, I was going back to the GP, and I'd been put on 7, I think. It was either 6 or 7 different types of antidepressants without being referred to a mental health professional at that point.
Okay. What?
Right? I don't quite know how that was happening. I was told at one point by a doctor that they couldn't magic a solution out of thin air for me, but they could have referred me. That they could have done. That probably wouldn't have taken, that's writing an essay, a letter, sorry, not an essay. That is a letter. That's my trauma coming through. It's not an essay. Writing a letter, referral isn't magic.
No, definitely not.
And again, this is my privilege. My mum had told me that I had a brilliant brain and I was a wonderful person, and that I'd had my dyslexia assessment. I knew my IQ wasn't low.
Yes.
So I was left with this sense of what is wrong with me. If that's true, if my brain is capable and I have the drive and the will to do things, the passion and the energy for stuff, then why do I feel so rubbish? Why am I crying all the time? Why do I get so angry at things? Why do things stress me out so much? And it wasn't until I was 26 that I got my ADHD diagnosis, and it was what it has led me to this is a great, I suppose you could call it my hyperfocus, my number one hyperfocus, my number one passion topic is psychology. So once I dropped out of my first degree, I embarked over the years on lots of separate little qualifications and bits of degrees. So I did a counselling qualification, and I went and did childhood studies and childhood psychology at the Open University. I did loads of my own reading, just trying to answer the question, what is wrong with me, right? And it gave me a deep appreciation for psychology as a science, for the minds and workings of other people, for the way that we can be shaped by our formative years. So it was doing my childhood studies course with Open University. I was actually reading an article for an essay that I was writing about gender differences in diagnoses in children. And I was writing a bit that was about why ADHD diagnoses were missed in girls at school. And I'd sent it over, as a good dyslexic person always does, to my parents for proofreading. And my mum called me back pretty quickly and went, "You're writing by yourself." And I was like, at first I was like, nah, this is me. I know what I've got. I've got depression. I've got this. But actually, no, my mood was rarely continually low. It was big swings within a day. It was high levels of distractibility and frustration over this kind of, I have had periods of depression, and it wasn't that's not what was consuming me all the time. And we looked at the waiting lists, and at this point I was so desperate for support that I decided, and again, this is where my privilege steps in, and we went private. My mum supported me to get a private ADHD diagnosis. The assessment's such an interesting thing to go through. Rather than this like interview style that I've been used to in terms of going to the doctors to talk about my mental health. It was somewhat interview style, but it was also the psychiatrist kind of prodding and poking to see what they could elicit from me. So one of the things, this was explained at the end of the assessment. I didn't know that this was happening while it was happening, but there were a few little tests he threw my way. So he was able to take me from laughter to crying in the space of 2 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
15 different responses. I think he told me at one point, he was like, I'm not sure that this is what you've got. You've told me actually you might have had it quite easy in life. And that was it. I was off. Waterworks. And then it was making me laugh. So that quick change in my emotional levels. He at one point said, I have to read through this. And he showed us a piece of A4 paper that was maybe 2/3 full of writing. He said, I've got to read this bit of writing. You can either sit there and wait for me to finish writing this, or there's toilets and teas and coffees outside. You can go and do that, and I'll come call you when you're ready. When I'm ready for you to come back when I'm finished reading this.
Yeah.
And I was out of my chair before he'd finished speaking.
Right.
To go and have a break from the room, to get up and to move around and whatever, while my mum was halfway through saying, oh no, okay, we're going out. So it was this kind of, so it was really interesting and telling assessment, actually.
Yeah.
And I remember at the end of the assessment, him confirming the diagnosis and setting me up with a prescription and telling me that my life was going to get much easier. And
wow,
I think that's probably one of the most important sentences in my life. It was pivotal, and more importantly, it was true.
Yes.
The space between stimulation and emotion and reaction that my medication gave me has allowed me to heal massively. And my medication is going to be something that I'm on and off with throughout my life, that I'll tweak. I'll try different ones, different dosages, because you need different things at different times. People aren't just one continuum throughout their lives, right? This is something that ebbs and flows, and sometimes things require me to have my meds, and sometimes my meds aren't helpful at all in different days and different times.
Okay.
And what I needed at that time was some space from these quick and big emotional reactions in order to heal, in order to get some clarity and direction, and see where I wanted to go with my life. And it did. It allowed me that bit of support and the space, the headspace to heal and to start a business, right? Like to get going with my life, to decide what I really wanted to do, to have that clarity. One of the wonderful things about ADHD is how excited and passionate I can become on the turn of a pin, right? But that's also makes things really quite difficult a lot of the time to have that sustained focus. And the medication's given me that. It's allowed me to remain with those things that are really important to me and move past the things that were getting in the way. I mean, it's really hard when you're wiped out, and this is no exaggeration, wiped out for a week over one experience with a call center on the phone, because it's so frustrating. I mean, and this is where, back to what we were saying earlier, you would have maybe a lot of people that would say, Devon, no, everybody struggles calling the bank. It is always difficult. It is always frustrating to be kept on hold. It is always frustrating to be told they can't help you, or that you've called the wrong department and you need to call another number. And it's like, yes, okay, but does it, the emotional distress that it causes me wipes me out for days. I'm a crying snotty mess on the floor and then I'm exhausted for days. It's no trivial matter how upset that I could get over those things.
Yeah. I've seen that with people I know, actually. Not necessarily if they've got ADHD or not, I'm not sure, but it takes me a while to get motivated to phone the call centre, but I normally find once I've done it, too tired, I won't do it. I'm too busy, I won't do it. But normally I find pleasant. But you see the people who they're either riled and they get angry, or it's this just once they're finished, they haven't got what they want and they're just exhausted. But they then do that for days and days and days after one 10-minute phone call, I guess. It's hard work.
I think, we were talking before about this sense you can have when people have a shared experience, be it of hardship or discrimination or trauma that we can sense. And I think one thing that maybe all of those things having in common is that we find defense mechanisms. And for me, I've always been very verbal, maybe hyper verbal, maybe a bit too verbal. And I was really quite young, experiencing bullying, from teachers, from peers. When I learned, one of the things that kept me safe was having an angry verbal reaction. Not many people could match up to that. That was the thing that protected me.
Right. Okay.
So, and when you learn that subconsciously, you have to do a lot of work to bring it into your awareness to unlearn it, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So that having that in your back pocket was almost a superpower. I could get anyone to back off or give me what they wanted because I could get angry enough and eloquent enough. Lots of people lose their words as they get more angry. Mine seem to kind of increase and get a bit away from me, but out of my control. And that's something that, I had to be able to be consciously aware of before I could work on. Because really this kind of young girl who was immediately put in the bottom sets for everything when I came back with my dyslexia diagnosis, I was massively understimulated at school because I couldn't have the verbal conversations I needed. I had to do the reading and writing, which I found very draining and not stimulating. I felt constantly underestimated and overlooked. So I got really good at being verbally impressive. That's how I defended myself. That's how I was able to show the world that I was strong, that I could be heard, that I shouldn't be overlooked, that you couldn't push me around, that I wasn't going to just do what I was told because I was told it. Because, and then come across this, I'm pretty sure if this had been more well researched at the time, I would have definitely ended up with the oppositional defiance disorder diagnosis or the pathological demand avoidance, which is something that lots of children with ADHD and autism are diagnosed with today.
Can you just expand on what that means?
Yeah. So oppositional defiance disorder and pathological demand avoidance. So this tends to be a trait or a diagnosis given to a child who either ignores direction or is very aggressive or oppositional to direction. Basically, and this is another resounding sentence from my childhood, doesn't do what they are told, at least not immediately, or without great kind of effort. And I think it's born of being repeatedly forced, told to, made to do things in line with typical expectations, like the read cover, write, check, right? I still don't know if I'm getting those words in the right order or saying the right ones. But so this is you're told to do it this way over and over and over and over, and this is going to work, and you've just got to do this method, and then you will learn how to spell the word, and it's not working for you time and time and time again. So eventually, some children are going to get to the point where you say, no, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do because it doesn't work for me. I'm going to say no. And I am hard pushed to find somebody with one of those diagnoses who hasn't also had a very directive, perhaps angry, perhaps shouty adult in their life. It's a trauma response. You could be shouted at all the time, told off. I was always in trouble. So one of the coping mechanisms for that, and again, it's subconscious when we pick up these coping mechanisms, especially so young, is to start ignoring that voice. It's to start not doing what told. It's to start doing other things, becoming argumentative, becoming oppositional, becoming defiant. And we're labeling that as a disorder. Pathological demand avoidance, pathologically avoiding demands that you are given. And even now today, if someone is directive with me, even if they were to say, Devon, eat that chocolate cake right now, my automatic reaction is to and it's from a very child-centered place within me, is to go, no, I don't want to, right? Until I've had a chance to process this and think if this is what I want and it is what's best for me, and then I want to do it. But if somebody said, oh, there's some chocolate cake there, would you like to eat some? Yes, please. There's it's not the same resistance to the directive.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or what's the point? Because you're going to tell me off anyway. Okay. Yeah.
I'm in trouble either way, right? Yeah. So I might as well get this next 30 seconds of freedom, ignoring you before you catch up with me and drag me back or whatever it is. Before then. Or
this is the low effort version. Yeah.
Or I'm genuinely confused. I don't want to try and do this spelling in the way that you're asking me to, because like you said, either I'm going to do it, get it wrong, and I'll be in trouble because I've not tried hard enough. Like, you're not trying hard enough, you're not working hard enough, you're not concentrating, you need to focus more, blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to get in trouble anyway. Either way. So there's this poor little brain that's still forming that is really just having a paralyzed moment of fear. Crap, I've been asked to do something that I'm not going to be able to achieve. I'm not going to be able to attend to. So what am I going to do? When we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, right? This is the kind of verbal version of that, the freeze. I'm going to just kind of on autopilot carry on doing what I was doing. But there's also this fight for control, right? The more you divert from the expectations of the adults around you as a child, the more, and I think that this is an old school view. I think that what lots of adults, teachers, parents can think is that we need to get scary with that child. We need to get shouty. Yes. We need to get controlling. We need to, some fear is healthy. We hear that a lot, right? In parenting. Oh, you've got to be a little bit scared of your parents. And no, I don't think so. No. I don't think so. Maybe, that's where the disappointment thing, maybe fear of letting them down a bit, fear of not living up to what we've got. That might be normal, but fear that we might get shouted at, fear that we might be violently attacked, because let's put that how that is. That's what it is. Fear of being hit, right? Like, that wouldn't stand up as an adult. That wouldn't stand up if it was management. That'd be gross misconduct. Why are we doing it to children? It's traumatizing them. Yeah. And they're going to, be fearful and timid and meek in response, or they're going to try and get some control back. And they're going to go, no, I'm not going to do what you told me to do because I'm getting so frustrated with you trying to be. And guess what? You've taught me this. You've taught me to be defiant, to be oppositional, because that's what you're like with me. I never get to do things the way that I want to do them. I never get to ask questions instead of doing the worksheet. I never get to put my point of view across, or if I do, I'm dismissed. So I'm going to shout louder because that's what you do. So I think those diagnoses, I would have definitely had one of those. I think if they'd have been more prevalent at the time, or if I'd have kind of bumped up against one, it would have definitely fit the kind of characteristics that I was displaying. But I take quite a bit of issue with it, because I think maybe we need to look at the adults surrounding the children that get those diagnoses, because I think that's actually the easier behavior to modify, and that's actually the behavior that's morally incorrect. Is the parental kind of feeling that we can have some power or control over anyone else's personhood through making them scared of us.
Yeah, and there's been lots of studies that show that doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is it. We are still living in, I said earlier, like we've got some, I don't know where these norms or what typical, where it comes from. Is it Victorian times? Is it the beginning of times? Is it the 80s? I don't know. But
well,
they stick around. It's the way that it's always been done. My parents hit me and it never hurt me. Well, did it? Because you now seem to be quite angry and shouty.
Yeah. Well, it's in theory, it should be an iterative learning process through generations, but that assumes that everybody wants to learn.
Absolutely. And I think we have a responsibility to do the learning when we become a teacher, when we become a manager, when we become a parent, when there is an inherent power dynamic that we now have over somebody else who is more vulnerable than us because of hierarchy or age or setting. I think it's our duty to do that learning. And that's where I kind of lie with this. I mean, we look at the coercive control laws that have just come into play in the last few years around domestic abuse in the UK.
Yes.
And, it gets really complex when we look at systems of domestic abuse. There tends to be a lot of toing and froing of bad behavior or acting out or acts of violence, acts of verbal abuse, emotional abuse on both sides. And the way that we kind of can look at that and see where it's stemming from and where the control is coming from is the power dynamic. Who has the power in that setting, in that household, in that relationship? Where does the power lie? And that's how we can tell who's at fault. Is it the child or is it the adult? Well, who has the power?
Yeah.
Who has the actual choice to change what's going on? It's the adult, always. It's the manager, not the member of staff.
Yeah. Yeah. You are so right. Yeah. So one thing, just to kind of not even segue, full left turn, I think. I'm curious. So you obviously mentioned about getting your ADHD diagnosis. I mean, dyslexia at a young age is similar to sort of my experience, but getting ADHD later on in life, you mentioned about having bouts of depressions and stuff, and how that changed afterwards. Now, how much did that change? You said depression's still a thing in your life. Now, having the ADHD, the right medication, and be honest, just understanding a bit more about your brain's going on, so you're not necessarily fighting its natural kind of state, I guess. I want to sort of understand, I guess, what long-windedly answering, welcome to my TED Talk, is how did you change how you managed the depression and stuff after you realised that ADHD was part of the mix?
I think there's two folds. I changed my life, first of all, my lifestyle. So I came out of what you might see as like a full workplace and started working for myself, which meant that I could find that belonging. I could find a role where I was valued, which hadn't happened before for me. Because entry-level roles weren't something that suited my brain type. And the education system, as it was set up, I mean, even going through the education system, you'd go into an entry-level position on the other end of that education. But the education system as it's set up didn't work for me either. Yeah. So coming away from from a formal workplace and choosing the divergent route of working for myself allowed me to, for the first time, feel like I could add value and that I was valued for my verbal dexterity, first of all. Time, I now get to speak truth to power. I get to be oppositionally defiant. And I'm actually really good at doing that now and speaking to people in a way that they can hear me and with kindness. And I guess a lot of that is the training that I had when it was the other way around. I learned really well how to be heard and how to put my point across. And also I've done all of this learning through my hyper focus of psychology and my counseling skills. It's just wanted to be someone. And I think we become the person that would have rescued us at our most difficult time.
Yes.
Right. And I strive to make everybody feel heard and empowered and all the things that I felt the opposite to when I was really struggling. So I had those skills now and I could just go directly to the source with them when I was working for myself. I could sell that, whether if I was going to do that through a traditional way, I would have had to have worked my way up from an entry level position. And what I found is those skills, that massive talent that I had was not well received when it came from the admin girl. I faced an awful lot of discrimination for my age, my gender, and being passionate and excitable just didn't fit the roles that I could find. So that was one way that I tackled my mental health. I found value, I found belonging, I found somewhere I could feel like I had a purpose that people valued. It's also about looking back, and the ADHD diagnosis allowed me to see that I wasn't lazy, that I wasn't rubbish, I wasn't difficult, I wasn't unkind. I was able to understand myself a lot better and, value myself. Not only was I able to come away and find a purpose in a role where I could add value to the world, to my community, I was also for the first time able to value what's wonderful about me that for a long time I had seen as this thing that got in the way of being able to find love and belonging in the world. I was able to put some of the discrimination, the abuse, the trauma that I had gone through, I was able to put the responsibility of that with the people that it belonged with and not try and take it on myself so heavily. But it's hard, right? There are still some of these learned behaviors that they're deeply ingrained and you find yourself slipping back into them. But when you have the awareness, kind of catch it as it's happening. I recognize what's going on here. I'm going into a rejection sensitivity moment, because when someone says, oh no, I can't hang out that evening, I get flooded with this rejection sensitivity dysphoria, is what they call it, RSD in the ADHD word. And honestly, my world spins. I'm immediately inconsolable. And there's physical pain in my chest and in my hands, loads of adrenaline and everything going on. And that's because of repeated traumas, PTSD, from having been othered and outgrouped so many times, from having, there was, without going into too much detail, that there were adults in my childhood who used violence, isolation, and horrible abusive tactics to try and get me to conform, to sit still, right? Just to get me to stop fidgeting or to stop asking questions or to be able to fall asleep more easily, which is, well documented, something that ADHD people struggle with. So I was able to put the responsibility of those things where they lay, and I was able to fully understand what was happening to me when someone said, oh, I can't hang out. And I was flooded with that feeling, this tidal wave emotional terror.
Yeah.
And it is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and it is dysphoric. It is like completely disconnected from reality. And you know, I can only liken it to something like PTSD. And before I had those words, before I could be like, oh, here comes the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I went with it. And the emotions say, no one loves me. Everybody leaves. I'm not a good friend. No one likes me. No one wants to spend time with me. Right. And that's what you believe. And that makes you depressed. That makes you upset. Yes. But if you could go, here comes the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I'm going to look after myself and care for myself to get through this tidal wave. And then once the waters have calmed, I can go, okay, do we think they don't like you, or do we think they just already had plans? Okay, it's probably that they already had plans. Or, you know, be able to communicate with that person. Hey, I'm sorry if I reacted strangely when you said you couldn't hang out tonight. This is what goes on for me when those things happen. And they go, oh my goodness, that's not it at all. I'd love to see, should we hang out tomorrow instead? Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, now I can fix that and put that where it belongs, rather than letting it make me chronically depressed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Interesting. It's funny, isn't it? Just the things our brain can send us down for something as simple as that person might just be exhausted from work that day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we try and do, isn't it? I think if when especially when we're children and we experience kind of adverse experiences, we often take the blame and the fault on as our own, particularly if we're told it's our fault. We can't see past that. It must be something that we've done.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Now, we've talked a lot about, I guess, mental health and things on this episode. If somebody's listening and they this is resonating with them, but they don't know the first step to take, do you have any recommendation?
It's about finding the language and the ways to explain and communicate. And I think then, you know, once you found something that resonates that you want to explore, and this is something Brené Brown says, so I won't paraphrase as my own. This is her concept, and she's someone that's been a massive inspiration to me.
Yes.
That story might be a bit warped, right? The story that they don't want to hang out with you tonight because no one loves you and everyone's going to leave.
Yes.
It's a bit warped. And if you need to talk that through, it's really important you talk that through with someone who's earned the right to hear it. Don't tell that story to someone who has not earned the right to hear it. They need to be a safe person. And it might be different people for different stories. You know, it might be sometimes you can talk to your family about that thing and you know that they're going to really understand what it's like to get rejected by a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a friend. But actually, maybe if it's about your brother or your sister or something like that, just as an example, your mum and your dad might not be the people that have earned the right to hear that story, because it might be your story that they always take your sibling's side. Or so it's about, while we're still processing it, while we're hearing things and thinking, oh, that might sound like me, or that's something I want to explore, or I want to share this with somebody, share it with someone that's earned the right to hear it. And if we can't think of the person that has earned the right to hear it, or if we're too emotionally clouded at the time to be able to know who's safe to share and talk about those things with, I would get to writing it down, or talking out, and recording it for yourself.
Yeah.
So much of what's at the root of this is shame. I'm not worthy. I'm not enough. I'm not lovable. And shame cannot survive being spoken out loud. This is another thing that Brené Brown says, which I think is excellent, right? It can't. If we feel deep shame about not being able to spell a certain word, and we can, in our head, in in the echo chamber of our brain, we get into, I can't spell, that means I'm rubbish, I'm not a proper adult, I can't do things like everyone else can do things, and it's because I don't try hard enough, and oh my goodness, how many times have I tried to spell this word and I still can't get it right? That shame that you're feeling, if you actually genuinely out loud say, I use a rhyme to spell the word said, I do it every day, sausages are indeed delicious, and I use that rhyme, and doesn't that make me such a child, and doesn't that make me rubbish because I can't spell it without the rhyme? You immediately know and feel in the words being said out loud, we're only as sick as our secrets, right? And that's the same principle. If you are keeping it secret, and shame is about hiding, right? You hide the fact that you can't spell said without sausages are indeed delicious. And you go, and if you try and hide it from people, right, then it's going round and round in your head, and you're perpetuating the shame about it. But if you get out there and you go, you know what? Yeah, I do use some rhymes to spell stuff. You can smile about it, or you can hear that it's a common thing that maybe everybody does with some words, or do you know?
Yes,
so it's about getting it out there and getting it out loud and accepting it, and it being like, hey, this isn't a thing to be feeling shameful about. It's often really hard to reach for self-love, right? And go for, you know what, I love myself anyway, even if I can't spell. And it's such a big thing to say self-love or self-care. What does that mean? That's so hard. And a mantra I like to come back to sometimes is, how human of me. I've missed 2 meetings today because I was rushing around trying to make meetings on time, and have somehow managed to be late for this one, and that had a knock-on effect. How human of me.
Yeah.
Right? It is. And have a little think about, I like to do backwards and forwards, have a little think about how many people in history since the beginning of time have made a similar mistake, have gone a similar way, have failed in a similar fashion. And also think, in 5 years' time, how am I going to feel about this mistake, this shame, this thing? Is it going to even matter? Am I going to even think about the fact that, my boss spoke about me really badly and put me down? Are they actually going to matter to me in 5 years? And the answer is normally no. And you can normally bring that back to about 6 months and be like, oh no. It's a forward and back check. This has happened to thousands of people before me, because this is a really human thing to do, and this isn't even going to matter to me in 6 months' time. Yeah,
definitely. That's perspective, isn't it? That is really just yeah. Okay, so to round the podcast out, I ask each guest 3 rapid fire questions. They're quick questions from me, but don't necessarily need quick answers from yourself. So,
okay.
Question number 1. What prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
What prejudices have I had about dyslexia?
Yep.
It's not a superpower, right? I think the only similarity that we have with superheroes is that we hide. We hide a bit of we try and mask like Clark Kent might do, right?
Yeah.
It's only a superpower in the way that it's something that other people might not expect that we can do, right? Our thinking might be a bit different, but having a really good visual brain doesn't make us a savant. It doesn't mean that we are worth more than other people. It means that we are perhaps not valuing or being valued for the things that our brain can do. It doesn't mean that we are superheroes and that we are extra special.
No. I completely agree with you on that one. Dyslexic strengths, I think, is better. And I think superpower can be slightly alienating to somebody who isn't from the particular neurodiversity that you were talking about at the time.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Second rapid fire question. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
Oh, I think I would go asset strength based. I'd say that people that think in a dyslexic way are probably more likely to have a very good 3D visual brain.
Yeah.
They're quite likely to be creative, thinkers. I might say that dyslexic people are very likely to be innovative thinkers and go outside the box. And now I think that some of the traits that neurodivergent people have are a direct result of having a brain that thinks a particular way. And I think some of the traits that neurodivergent people have in common are a result of having to be innovative, right? Like my mum has an excellent working memory for words because she used to memorize her school books, hearing someone else read them, because then when she was asked to stand up in class, and I think she actually did the classic thing once of standing up, reading the whole book, feeling very proud, putting the book down and seeing a very angry face on the teacher because she'd held the book upside down. So I think I'd probably go for those things. You know, we might be innovative outside of the box thinkers, but that might not be because we're dyslexic. That might be because we've thought of other ways to prove ourselves or show up in the world.
Yes. Cool. And final question is rapid fire set. Seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favourite dyslexia life hack?
What's my favourite dyslexia life hack? Find what you love, find what you enjoy doing and the way you enjoy doing it, and do that.
Yeah, definitely. Makes life a lot easier when you do that. Okay, before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add, and where can people find you?
I think that, what else can I add? I've just had a really great time chatting, and it's been a pleasure to be on the podcast. So I'm really hoping that I can have added some value and some interesting points, because you guys have covered so much. People can find me on LinkedIn and on the Self-Agency website. So I'm Devon Lowndes on LinkedIn. And if you go to www.self-agency.org, that's my website.
Cool. Yeah, I will link them in the show notes for people to check out. That just leads me to thank you very much for taking the time to come on the podcast this evening. It's been really great to understand how some of the trauma links in, particularly with dyslexia and ADHD. So I want to thank you for opening up about that.
Thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful space. So thank you. I've really enjoyed myself.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen. And I'll speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.